Welcome back for another presentation in your Human and Cultural Geography course. This time we're going to look at gender and sexual identity within the realms of geography and through the lens of a human geographer. Again, these presentations go with the textbook that we're using by Dr. Steve Graves at Cal State Northridge, an Introduction to Human Geography. So this goes with, That's why we move pretty quick within them. So that being said, let's get going. All right, let's start with our introduction. So it's entitled Boy or Girl. So coming into times and being more appropriate and relevant and cognizant of others and seeing them, it's the idea of gender has transcended just the two words. So it says gender identification is fluid based on a part of geography. We certainly have that male versus female, binary versus other models. We have things such as gender assignment, social construction. Gender identities will vary across time and through space, and they have. And then there's this idea of like a gender spectrum, which is the image that I've shared here, is that you have a little bit of representation across the entire board. Now, something that I think is interesting is that I know that gender roles and sexuality has become a very complex and delicate conversation to have, but it's not new. This goes back quite some time. In fact, we have evidence and narratives from local indigenous tribes in California who had terms to describe those that did not identify neither as a boy or girl, or perhaps were LGBTQ, even at that time, and we're going back hundreds of years. So it's just a very interesting narrative because we often hear that you think it's new, and it's not. This is not something that's new. This is not something that should be a surprise. It's things that we have endured and allowed people to represent themselves for centuries. So. But how do we see this in geography? We see this in geography a lot of different ways, not just as the human aspect, but we can see it perhaps even in language. So most countries, English is not the greatest at this in a sense, most countries have associated a gender to a term. So whether the term be masculine or feminine. So what I'm sharing here is an image of words in Spanish that have either a gender, being masculine or feminine, using what termination or type of letters are used to identify that, and then an example of that later. So it's a very interesting, we see this in some French, we see this in German, we see this in Spanish. So we see this across the spectrum in different words. Here's some others that are there. But, how do we know if there's a gender to something, right? I think in like an American culture, cars are female, because it's a she. But in most other countries, vehicles are male. What a beautiful building. Using the word beautiful to describe a large piece of architecture. So, how do we know? And a lot of this is discourse in how we identify and utilize language. Moving forward, looking more at, I don't know if you can hear it. He was coming around. He's sleepy, I guess. That's Winston. Language, pronouns, what we see today. So we know that, there's this, identifying a specific person's pronouns, what you prefer to be called. We've had traditional she, her, hers, herself, he, him, his, himself. But now we're doing other ones such as, we shouldn't be doing them. I don't want to sound ignorant on it, but now we're acknowledging in a larger spectrum, they, she, z, they, all these different other, and there's a whole other spectrum there as well. But we've been using pronouns to describe things forever, to describe them, to describe her, him, his, they. So we've been certainly using this, but we see this in our language, in vernacular, traditional language, and even in some case marketing and in marketing on industry. So California is probably the most LGBTQ friendly state. We have documented evidence of LGBTQ in California going before the gold rush, but we can see that the Bay Area has always been this safe space or harbor for people to get together to be their authentic selves. Not always in peace. There was the murder of Harvey Milk up in San Francisco. So there's other things that have happened within cultural past. Yet that we find that California seems to be the most progressive out of all other locations. Sorry, now he's rolling on the carpet. We see this in other communities as well in California. I think another prominent community that is LGBTQ based and friendly is Palm Springs. And we certainly see it in other areas like in West Hollywood and other spaces. Moving forward, same-sex marriage. This video is being done in December of 2024. Our president will be president-elect is Donald Trump, and there are different views on same-sex marriage than there has been in the past with other presidents. So we will have to see what happens. Will there be a pull on that one way or another? But how do we provide criteria that can feasibly determine a person's legal identity when it comes from same-sex marriage? Maybe it be even with Olympics and sports. What are the rules? Do you have male sports, female sports, non-binary sports? What is the healthy balance that can be agreed upon by all those involved? Evolution of gender roles, we've seen a shift dramatically. We've seen a much more dramatic shift again in the last 20 years. But this dates back beyond slavery and roles given to specific genders. We've seen this also in Spanish missionaries, that in many, many cultures, depending on the gender of birth, kind of depicted the role in which you would play in your household or in your community or sometimes within your tribe. In California geography, we also discuss other roles that predate slavery and how certain tribes of indigenous Californians had gender and sexual roles. So in fact, some tribes would try to get someone who was perhaps gay to be part of their family as a third parent, because you had the strength of a man, but maybe the softness of a woman when it comes to nurturing in some cases. So this goes back, like I said, beyond just generations into centuries. In fact, pre-industrial gender roles, we saw that, in traditional American homes, most of the kitchens was the woman's space. The men had the garage, and there was the transition zone in between, which is like the TV or entertainment room. But we saw gender roles in agriculture societies, family trades or crafts, domestic spaces such as our houses. But how did the Industrial Revolution change the status of the home? And part of it was in the Industrial Revolution, women started working in spaces producing textiles, and that was a start. And I think that certainly kind of broke that mold on what all gender roles have been in the past. And then we've seen this progress since then in other different ways. We saw it in architectures, we'll talk in a moment, in World War II. We see it also with the support of LGBTQ, and it's continuing to shift in that there isn't a prominent role in one way or another in most households, specifically and solely based off of gender. So here we see in the Victorian era female domesticity, where women were so uncomfortable in their clothing they couldn't do anything anyway. And when we're poor, they did not have property rights. And it was just very within the Victorian era, even when people were moving across different countries, if you were with your husband and your husband was the landowner and he died, you would not receive the property, even though you were married to him. And in some points, what was almost ironic is that most slaves had more rights than women in certain areas around the world at that time, which was, obviously wrong, but also ironic. Housing, house design. So most of our architects in the past were men, white men. And then World War II, we saw a huge shift in architectural design because men were out at war in World War II and returning back and getting into the workspace. Women had stepped in and started redesigning, the landscape that would then become what we identify as the American dream. We saw that architecture started introducing courtyards and fences to create places that were private yet open. We saw designs, like I always think the kitchen is one of the most fascinating to me, is that in traditional homes prior to this movement were incredibly small, and then but the garages were detached and they were much larger. Maybe they had a breezeway. And when women started getting more involved in the actual architecture itself, you saw that kitchens began to expand, that additional services were being provided, like running water, dishwashers, stoves, things like that. And just seeing an expanse in the kitchen, that it wasn't just a very small, usable counter, that it became a space that could also entertain. Moving forth in the 20th century, obviously there was the flappers, rose of the riveters as a design, especially in California during World War II. And then this vision of like where is a woman's place became very prominent in the 20th century, and that those boundaries were being beyond just what was identified pre that and into Victorian, and then obviously before that, is that there isn't a space for that. It's anywhere, and that's for anyone that could have that. Why does that say the number 7? Because that should be an and sign. What about our landscapes? Who gives a better cut, a salon or a barber shop? Or you've got the blue aisle versus the pink aisle. Or what about the pink tax? Maybe you've not heard of that, so I'll say very quickly, but the pink tax is this underlying nuance where you'll have blue razors for men and pink razors for women, and even though they may be the exact same thing, except for the color of the razors, the pink razors will cost more. You see that in usually those type of goods, shaving creams, deodorants, and stuff like that. But the pink tax, and it goes beyond that as well. What is this gendered landscape? And we've seen this for a long time. Very, very prominent growing up in the 80s and 90s, and then we saw this shift in the mid-2000s where, well, wait a minute, like what if we could blend this line instead of being a boy Lego aisle versus a girl Lego aisle, that we just have a Lego aisle. And in some places there was success, some places there's been pushback, but things continue to move forward, and we'll have to see what comes next. But these gendered landscapes, we also can see this in architecture. Like I said before, you can see this in media, you can see this in commercialism, you can see this in marketing, clothing, retail. It goes on and on and on and on. But women in the environment, so environmental issues like air, water quality, climate change, pollution, we're finding that more and more women are involved within those motions and movements. Even from where I'm talking now, we're seeing a lot more vocal. It's not to say that women were not involved in these things, but they're now in a position where they're much more vocal. Looking at this last election in the year 2024, women's rights, reproductive rights, children's rights, when it comes to certain things like along those parts. Has been much more vocal because it became part of the political landscape as to who do you vote for. And so there were a lot of different things that were running out of 2024. We're seeing policy strategies are not as evident, and we do see that because it's like politicians don't necessarily want to take a stance unless they know it's going to win them. It says women are critical agents, sustainable agriculture and forestry. We're seeing a flux of women representing in STEM sciences, and we're also starting to see that women are outnumbering men when it comes to the two genders in academics as students. The other pronouns certainly do exist in our academics, but it's not as prominent of a number as it does for the other two. But anyway, it's not important. But we're starting to see a shift, and I think that we are going to continue to see shifts, especially with not just women, but women of color and people of color, and people are being much more vocal, and we're finding that when you're much more vocal about the things that you believe in, there's a lot of other people that believe the same thing, so you're not alone. And I think that's a really important piece of this bigger puzzle. So, recap. Looking at gender and sexual identity in geography, we see it a lot. We can see it in languages, we can see it in laws, we can see it in movements, we can see it in arts and music. I mean, I'm sure you've been on TikTok and they're playing these songs from the 20s that wouldn't even be able to play on the air now because the language are being used. And that was done specifically as a gendered element, a sexual element of women's rights in those times. So we see it, we acknowledge it, and we have to embrace it because this is an area that we see that a lot of people are not being heard, not being seen, and not feeling represented. So, but nonetheless, definitely gender, sexual identity, and geography, we see it in our landscape, we see it change, and we see it in many different ways it can change, positive or negative. But hopefully by us working better together to support one another and all people, regardless of religion and gender and anything else that's in between their politics, we remember that we're here. We've got to be good humans. So that being said, if you have any questions, be sure to throw those below. Otherwise, we will talk soon.